General Clark, can you hear me? I was having problems with my microphone.
I can hear you. Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, good.
Emerald Light, we're waiting on. We've got one member that'll be joining late, and we're waiting on one other. But I think here shortly we can get started.
Okay. I've got,
Give everybody just another minute to come in here.
okay, all right.
Mary Kate, I think we're ready to go live here, and Admiral Light, we'll turn it over to you to get started here, sir.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Before I get started on my comments, I'd like Jamie Inman just to open it up for us real quick.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I really just wanted to welcome the new board members. We're delighted that you've joined us. We've got a great board where everyone's just interested in doing what's in the best interest of VMI. Very important committee, very important meeting, but please don't be shy. I promise we'll all be collegial and work towards the best for VMI. Unless anyone's got any questions to me, I'll turn it over to Admiral McKnight. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks, Jim. Again, good afternoon, everybody. I just one pitch before we get started into the details. We're in our third day of Compete to Win. We're approaching the 275K amount. If you haven't given, I encourage you to. It's important because as we will talk here in a few minutes about our athletic budget, and the more we can get in from our alumni and friends, that's great. Just a couple notes, and then I'll turn it over to Dallas and the staff there. As Dallas will mention, this year the state budget has not been completed. There's some issues between the House side and the Senate side, so that will not. They're going to come back for a special session, and so we won't know the exact numbers for another couple weeks. But what we do know is pretty much the state funding level is basically flat, so we're not going to see any big increases there. We do not feel, and if you have any questions, we can talk to Dallas, that the CLE Phase 2 will be in the budget. The Senate supports it, but the House of Delegates does not. The big issue coming up, of course, is matriculation and the number of cadets we bring in. The class of 2026 will graduate here in May. That was a small class, and it hurt us financially. And so hopefully we'll get back up to our numbers. I'd ask Sharon Eastcombe if she could just give us a quick update on where we are right now, looking at it.
Hi, sir. Happy to. Hello, everybody. As of right now, we are sitting at 355 partial and full reservations for the future class of 2030. That is putting us ahead of where we have been historically at point in time this time of year. So as of right now, we're anticipating we'll still have our summer melt or our loss that we normally have. The 5-year rolling average on that is typically around 50. We're budgeting 61 on that, though, just to kind of see where we're landing. So the numbers are strong right now. Right now, we've had no canceled reservations. We've had some canceled before deposit. A lot of what we're hearing in our yield events, what we're hearing still in our recruiting events, is that they're kind of waiting for an academy appointment last calls, or if they're actually going to get there. That always impacts that bottom line and that number. So we are actively working with those families, and work continues to just seat the class between calls from our parents' council members, our cadets, our alumni that are helping us do this. So we are optimistic with where we're at, since we are still ahead in our deposits from this point in time last year. The goal, of course, being as close to 500 more. General Furness, I know, would love that, as all of us would, but with everything we're tracking right now, we'll be really close.
Shannon, do you want to just comment on the open house, because that's somewhat related activity here?
Yeah, absolutely. So open house attendance has actually been really strong. With our final open house, we're over 180. I'm going to tell you 182 was the last count that I had. And a lot of those are going to be seniors still. That is, of those seniors that are attending, they have not made a decision to attend or not. They're still in appointed status. So what that means is they're using this open house as a determination on whether they're going to choose to select VMI as their institution. So there's a lot of positive momentum coming up for the 10-11 April open house. But those numbers are tracking well ahead, as they have in the past as well. General Clark, does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
You're very welcome.
General Clark, that's pretty much all I have, and I'll turn it over for you and your staff, and you can go ahead and proceed. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you all very, very much. The purpose of our presentation and our dialogue discussion today as a committee is to highlight the budget assumptions. You saw those on the read ahead materials, and overall just get a sense and a direction from the committee as we start to pull together the budget and bringing forward the details for you with the specifics when we meet at the April Board of Visitor meeting. At the April meeting, the decision, we do typically adopt a budget at that meeting. As you all know, we don't have always perfect information, which is why we make that mid-year adjustment usually at the January board meeting. For instance, we don't know if everything else is known on the funding side, we still don't know for sure what actually the enrollment will actually be. And so we always have to make those adjustments. So when we come in April, we will be recommending a budget for you all to adopt based upon a series of assumptions. And then based upon the actuals, by the time we get to drop add in the fall, then we begin to adjust the budget and you all adopt those final adjustments when we meet in the January Board of Visitor meeting. So if that just for those that are joining the committee for the first time, the sequence of events of the activity with the budget, we give the preliminary assumptions in January, a work session here where we can talk in more detail, an adoption of the budget in the April-May meeting, depending where that date falls, with final adjustments taking place in January based upon actual enrollment, actual state funding, and so forth. So that's the rhythm as it relates to the budget aspect. Today, I'm going to turn the time over to, I'll share the screen here. Jeff Lawhorn is going to walk us through some of these assumptions and the charts about where we sit and walk through. I know at some point in time here, or as we go through, there's maybe further discussions about the legislative cycle and timing. Prepared to talk about that as well. I know General Furness has some points here as we get to the end of things he may want to offer as well as we get wrapping up on the back end. There are a few questions that came in from a member of the committee. We're working on finalizing those details and can push that back out also to the committee to review ahead of the April meeting. So barring any objection, I'll share my screen here and we'll begin walking through here. Jeff?
All right. If you go ahead and go to that second page, right? This will just walk through some of the key budget assumptions that we'll have a spreadsheet later that show you some numbers. But right now we have factored into the budget 3% increase in both in-state and out-of-state tuition. We attached and everyone should have received a sheet that would show just what that looks like when set beside of the current year's tuition and fees and how much those increases would be for the various tuition and fee line items. Also proposing a 3% increase in fees in the auxiliary athletic and the UMA fees. The other key assumption is with our enrollment. We certainly are hoping for more than 480. We feel that's a conservative number, and it's much easier to adjust upward if we get more than that than to have to try to adjust down. So we're budgeting a new cadet class of 480. The old core enrollment, that we usually go back and use a 3 to 5 year trend data to determine how many of our fourth classmen at this point will return as thirds as seconds, and so forth. And so we end up with an opening day enrollment of 1,594. Now that opening day is the number of new cadet matriculants and the old core that registers when the old core returns. It's never really a real number that we have in barracks because we will have some attrition of the new cadets by the time that the old core returns. Another key assumption and a cost driver is a 3% employee salary increase. I think as General Clark may have mentioned, the House and Senate differed. The House had a 2% increase. The Senate had 3. We're not sure where that will land. We assume it would probably be one or the other or somewhere in between, but to be safe, we budget the higher amount because again, if the state does something less than 3, it's much easier to adjust expenditures downward than upward. Another significant cost driver, and I'm hearing this just anecdotally in the local governments around here, it just seems like everyone is experiencing significant increases in the medical insurance premiums and the employer share and increases in the employee share. We say essentially level state general funds with the exception of the state share of salary and benefit increases. So we will get more state funds than last year, but most of that is related to the state share of the E&G salary and benefit increases. So it's definitely not a net sum gain there. Most departmental operating budgets, we have not really factored in increases for those. We have factored in increase in budgets for utilities, which we know are increasing, our insurance, which that's all through the state, and then many of our ongoing maintenance and service contracts that we outsource to third parties. We just know inevitably there's always some annual, if nothing more, just inflationary increases on those. We're trying not to expand the scope of those other than just what is absolutely necessary, but we know even the same thing will cost us more next year than in the past year. So General Clark, I'll keep this note on my screen if you want to go to the spreadsheet, and I can address. This is still a preliminary. There's refinements to do, but at this point in time, given all the assumptions we just went through, this is where our 3 major state programs, and then we have athletics, because again, a key program for us. As you see, E&G and UMA are budgeted. We do have some flexibility between those 3 programs. There are certain functions that are legitimately can be charged to one or more of those. So to the extent that things shift between them, we can make some adjustments there as needed. As most of you know, athletics is always a challenging one because there's a lot of restrictions on what funds we can use for athletics, like none of the tuition, can go for athletics. These are, we show right now some significant projected deficits. The auxiliary deficit, one of the key components there is the indirect cost charges. Every 2 years, we're required by the state to recalculate an indirect cost rate. And that fluctuates. Some years there's very little fluctuation, and it's all driven by past year's expenditures. This year, the preliminary rates are for the state auxiliary programs, which is essentially all auxiliary programs except athletics, is like 29%. We're still looking at that. There may have been some extraordinary expenses, I would call them, in the base year that we're calculating that on, that it would be reasonable to exclude some of those, which would reduce that rate. However, as you can see from that indirect cost line, that zeroes out across all programs. So any reduction in the indirect costs paid in auxiliary, UMA, or athletics directly impacts the indirect cost revenues that come into the E&G program. So if you do nothing but adjust the rate, you just shift where you might have a deficit. But again, that can be taken care of somewhat through the ability of certain functions to be charged to the different programs. We tried a couple different methods on the auxiliary calculation this year. And one of the changes we did was we historically have always did one auxiliary indirect cost rate for all auxiliary programs. And there's two key components to that, but one of the primary calculation factors is square footage. So we thought, well, maybe if we should pull athletics out just to see how that falls, if we look at calculate the portion of the indirect cost to athletics that's related to square footage and how that works. And it resulted in their rate being it was a little more than last year, but it was from 21 to like 22%. So I feel that's a reasonable calculation. It wasn't done as a sole motive to try to reduce the amount paid by athletics, because again, when you reduce one, you just feel it in another program. So we're still tweaking that a little bit. I would not expect any significant changes, but we still want to make sure when we finalize on that the rates are ones that it's not just the rate we want, it's the rate that the numbers actually calculate to. There's SHEV guidelines on methodology, and it can get fairly complex. And it is subject to audit. And we certify every year to the state that we've recovered our indirect cost. And then the Auditor of Public Accounts, APA, during our annual audit, will look at that to determine that we did in fact recover the required indirect costs, and also the methodology was reasonable. I don't know if there's any other specific questions there. We have some notes to some of those. Again, just it's highlighting a lot of what was mentioned on the first page about some of the assumptions that we make. And then one just that maybe the auxiliary shared cost line, that's not a real, obvious line. What that is a number of what would be primarily, if they even existed at other schools, an auxiliary function, going back to the early days of the unique military activities appropriation. The state acknowledged that some of our activities are strictly related to the military. That's why, so for our laundry, we charge it to auxiliary, but we then can reimburse auxiliary with UMA funds for 75%. And you can see the four areas there that are funded either wholly or partially from UMA funds. And of course, there's other activities, Commandant's Office and all that's in those UMA numbers as well, but that's independent of these shared costs. If we But I don't know if there's any specific questions on this page, if anyone wants us to go into any more detail.
Jeff, it's Teddy. I have a question around the fund balance. What's the auxiliary fund balance expected to be at the end of this fiscal year? And what would this $2 million deficit result in?
Right now, we're working simultaneously on our reports for our end of April board meeting, where we will do we will show the projections, the actuals through March, and then the projected for the year. Right now we'll have better numbers when we get that completed, but it looks like we would probably be not factoring these numbers in 11 to 12 million in our auxiliary fund balance. These numbers, we always, I guess we want to be realistic, but we do also feel these are kind of a worst case. We budget a certain amount of vacancy savings into these numbers, but we never want to over budget those. We try to be conservative in our budgeting. So if in fact we were to end fiscal 26, when let's say with a $12 million auxiliary fund balance, we would also have some local, which we really don't show here because so much of that is restricted. But then if in fact this is the way this worked out, as we know, that entire 2 million would have to come from auxiliary, because that's really our only source to make up for any athletic deficit. We can Most of our local funds, our local unrestricted that comes from the foundation, we cannot use for athletics. And we already budget a significant amount of restricted funds that come from not really the foundation, but the KEDAC Club and the development board, or the alumni agencies board now, to support that. So as of today, we'd estimate 11 to 12 million. So if we were to say, if we were closer to 12 and we had that 2, that would, looking out a year, we're at 10, which is setting right about the minimum where we would want to be. We really don't want to go much below that. The chef calculations for the minimum fund balance gives you a range of percentages of various things. And we usually try to calculate that at the higher end of the percentage so that our minimum is on the high end of what chef's guidance would be. So it is definitely taking us near the bottom. And as we've discussed a lot internally, and there's lots of discussions with the athletic budget, that is as much a reason as any that we have to address the deficits, and those can't just become the subsidies to athletics, to the extent that they result in deficit spending in the auxiliary program, it is unsustainable. We know that, and that's one of the things we're working toward and know we have to get to. General Clark, if you want to go to the next screen. This is the document I referenced a minute ago that shows current fiscal year 26 tuition and fees, the proposed fiscal 27 tuition and fees that show essentially the 3% increase down the line, and it shows the for each line what that means. We like to remind that we have not only our own extensive financial aid program, we have a significant number of cadets on scholarships that pay much of this, like the ROTC scholarships pay. They pay, the tuition. They pay the auxiliary fees. They don't pay the quartermaster charge, but and they don't pay the room and board. But I guess we just like to remind everyone that while these fees can be, they certainly look big. When if you look at a non-Virginian and it's going to go up by $1,900, the number of non-Virginians that will truly pay an extra $1,900 is very, very small, because of both the scholarship programs and just our own internal aid and our goals at meeting the percentages of need. And as you know, probably, or most of you do, you've heard we meet 100% of the demonstrated need of Virginia cadets. So a cadet whose financial situation does not change from one year to the next, much of that will be covered by financial aid.
Jeff, if we could, Shannon, if you could chime in here and just talk a little about our affordability discussion and some of those points, I think might be helpful as people look at these numbers, as the board looks at these, and just in context with the overall discussion on affordability. It may be helpful, particularly for those that are new, to understand the comprehensiveness of the financial aid program and how that overlays with this cost proposal.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir. To Jeff's point, yes, a lot of them are on ROTC, or even we have to remember those that have their GI Bill or military benefits that they're using as dependents, they actually qualify for in-state tuition as well. So when we're looking at that and we have a certain amount that are receiving not just ROTC, but call to duty, if you look at athletic aid, if you look at the waivers for VMS-DEP or what they're using for GI Bill, the affordability really comes down to helping families understand kind of how the financial aid works at VMI versus other schools. And so what I like to point out to them is your bill is your bill at VMI. We don't have program fees or course fees, things like that, which is a big selling point when we're comparing ourselves to other schools. And so in some cases, just this year alone, helping families understand how the financial aid packaging works at VMI and compared to other schools, and meeting 100% of the need for in-state, 60% for out-of-state. And it really just helps those families understand, like, an apples to apples comparison as best as possible. But we always work with families to figure out how we can help them take into account their current financial situation and understand really what those financial aid awards truly mean, basically when it comes down to the bottom line that they're paying.
Thanks, Shannon.
You're welcome, sir.
General Clark, if you want to go to the next screen, this is a document, and we have another similar one. Many of you that have been around are familiar with this. This is where we've listed the in-state and out-of-state tuition for a number of in-state schools and a few out-of-state ones that we consider competitors: Norwich, Citadel, Texas A&M. This particular sheet is sorted by in-state tuition and fees. So as you can see, of course, Norwich is theirs is not going to change being a private school, but this shows where VMI falls on the comparison with these other schools on our in-state tuition. Now, we do exclude our quartermaster fee from this because certainly none of the other civilian schools would charge anything close to that, and they wouldn't provide those services. So we've always excluded that fee. It's still expenses that students will have at the other schools: laundry, haircuts, that clothing, that type thing. But we feel like to get a better comparison that doesn't really kind of skew against us, we always exclude that, and we note that at the bottom. We always look good. I think on the in-state, we're usually always somewhere near the middle, and it's good to look around at some of those other in-state schools in particular, just to see how we fall there. The next page, same data set, same numbers. The only difference is it's sorted by out-of-state tuition. And that's where, you can see where we fall there. We do move up some. We're still not at the top, but certainly we're not in the middle, and even a little below the average as we were on the in-state. We always look at that, and we do take into account the tuition and fees at other school. But again, I think, as Shannon noted, we are very much an all-inclusive cost. I've said many times, if there was ever a college where you essentially could send your son or daughter without any money in their pocket, and they would be fed, they would be housed, they would have clean clothes, things that just, those are costs that, you are not in your tuition and fees at other colleges. And for those who have experienced it or had children do that, you realize those costs can add up more than you realize. I think, again, too, and this is where the open houses come in, communication of that is key. That's the message I think Shannon and admissions is and has to try to get out there, is that while there may be the initial sticker shock, one, very few people will pay that, and two, there's a lot built into that you may not think of. We hear stories of other schools where the students pay money to be on club sports. They have to drive their own vehicles, pay for their own lodging if it's an overnight trip. We fund all of that for our club sports. If they're missing meals, we're paying for their meals while they're on the road coming back from a competition, and it's a very inclusive number. Then this was just to show where we have been, where we are, and projecting on enrollments. So obviously you can see for fiscal 27, we're showing 480. That if you start looking back at, if you look at the past 3 years, on average, that falls right into what that would be, an average. Obviously fiscal 23, which was the fall of 22, class of 2026 was the year that just what we hope will always remain an anomaly for our, modern day numbers. So, you can see we're beginning to inch back up. We don't have it shown here, but we ran this for 28, 29, and 30 using new cadet classes of 490 in 28, 500 in 29, and 500 in 2030. And I think that census number in 2030, we estimated to be 1646. So we're just about back to where we were in fiscal 22. So, it certainly helps that the class of 26, the very small class, has left. And, we're, hope to replace that with a closer to normal sized class. And again, as with any school, just about, enrollment is a key number. And again, with our transfer numbers are very, very small. So we want, once, we get them in once, really, we get that initial enrollment of new cadets. And I know there's a lot of initiatives, and I think even in the strategic planning that relate to retention, which we understand how there's the recruitment portion for sure, but then the retention part is always forefront, I think, on everyone's mind.
Jeff, a question about that, if I could. Did you say that in 2030, that's when that fall census number is at 1646, which is about the same as 2022?
Correct. And it was assuming the new cadet class in 28 goes to 490, and then in 29 and 30 at 500. So
Okay.
we've taken it back to our historic budgeting numbers, but not, I think at one point a few years ago, we probably did some projections in out years with maybe as many as 515 or 520 in some of the new cadet numbers.
I don't know about that, but I will say that for the board, this is new information. We've been looking at a recovery back to the 22 type numbers being a lot sooner than 2030. I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
We had, sir,
Well-
when we laid some of these pieces out years ago, we had projected larger core sizes, and really that it was this fiscal year 27 that was going to be we thought would be a lot closer at that time, but we haven't had the enrollment numbers to really sustain that, so that has moved to the right. You're correct, sir.
And that changes the view on, for the board anyway, of growing out of financial difficulties. Just an observation. We need to factor that into our thinking.
To the committee, this is an opportunity for some comments, discussion. I think what we're hopeful for this is some direction. It's not a decision that will come at the April board meeting, but as we start to prepare and bring together the budget, is the committee comfortable generally with the assumptions that we're working under with these enrollment targets at 480 with the 3% tuition and fees, vis-a-vis what we are projecting is increased costs associated to bear those increases against, and other discussions that may want to be had. This was intended to be a open work session and dialogue, and Admiral McKnight. So I turn back to you here, however you all want to facilitate this discussion as a committee.
Well, let me just make a comment. First of all, Dallas, thank you, and Shannon, and everybody from the team for putting all this data together. As we see, the projections that for our savings account basically is decreasing. So I think it's imperative that we strongly consider the 3% increase for tuition and fees. We cannot. I think we just cannot take a bump like we did last year. We did increase our tuition is pretty much on par, and as Shannon and everybody explained, a lot of these people are, whether it's ROTC with, all these scholarships they have, they're not paying a lot out of pocket. And so I think it's, we've got to look at it strategically and make sure that we keep up where we're going. And the other thing is, if we look at inflation, look at what's going with fuel costs, over the last month or so. So nobody's given VMI a cut rate on bananas and everything like that. So we've just got to stick with the numbers and the recommendation of the increase for tuition fees. That's where I'm going to stand and continue to push forward.
I have a quick question.
Ms. Phillips?
It seems as though in previous years, and I may be remembering this wrong, that there was some direction from the governor. Okay, colleges, we want y'all to, have no tuition increase or have a 2% or have there was some direction across the state from the governor. Do we anticipate that? Have we heard any of that? Is that likely to happen or not happen?
That's a fair question. We have not received or had any signals that would suggest that type of direction will be coming from the governor or through the secretariats. We've had nothing of that nature as we've had in the past. And as you know, many of those conversations and details worked oftentimes has worked even with members of the board. So you all may learn about that as quickly as we do if there were some things that started to shift in that direction.
General Furness, we'd like to hear from you if you have a few comments, please.
Yes. Can you hear me all?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, obviously, I support the direction reflected in the proposed budget. I think the 3% tuition increase is the bare minimum that we need with some of the cost factors that have been previously addressed. Inflation being one of them, healthcare being another. And so we have to keep pace with that. And that's really one of the only levers that we have to do so. I also think, for the athletic department, their group, we need to look at athletic fees. I know nobody really wants to do that. We believe they're so high, but they fall into the same factor. If you're in a ROTC scholarship or all these scholarships, you're paying that fee. That's part of the scholarship. That's part of the federal assistance. So it's a way to put more money in the coffers and lower that financial the decrement there to the overall budget. And so, when you focus on our affordability and what we do with our aid programs that Shannon runs, I think the last time somebody showed me numbers, it was like 80 some cadets that pay full freight in the Corps cadets. And, at least 30 of the 80 are cadets from Thailand and Taiwan who pay full freight. And so, there's not a whole lot of out-of-state, CONUS-based U.S. citizens or in-state that pay full freight at all here. So, like Admiral McKnight said, we're kind of in the mid-pack of our tuition and fees, and what you see is what you get with us. And so I think it's we just have to make that case and explain it well in forums such as, and I think we do a good job at open houses and whatnot, so that there isn't sticker shock. But even the Citadel, which has a lot more state support than we get here at VMI, they have some outlying fees that they don't factor into their numbers that are published that would boost their numbers up significantly. So again, I'll restate it. I support this budget. I appreciate all the detailed work that has gone into formulating them. We'll know more before our board meeting, as the General Assembly will come to terms with the overall budget, and we may be able to refine some things going into the board meeting and have a clear picture of the budget that we will formalize at that meeting.
Colonel Dick, I see your hand is up, sir.
Oh, well, thank you very much. My question goes to the flip side of this. Could you tell me a little bit about the analysis or assessment of the uh, issue of cutting expenses, reducing the cost of any of these programs? I know that's figured into it a little bit, and I embrace and accept the 3% increase here in tuition, but I think that having information about the argument to be made about why we cannot reduce fees or expenses for the budget here is important to have as ammunition for this discussion. Could you give me a little bit of insight on that?
Yes, sir. Thanks for the question. We have just relative to the overall budget, I think we've done over the last several years as we've had the overall decrease in the overall core strength. We've had in place a number of reductions that continue to remain in place. We did move out on a number of non-capital projects, to get caught up on some infrastructure pieces. But as we look at this current budget in fiscal year 27, we are still planning on and still looking for opportunities for vacancy savings. So that's, as positions come available through turnover, evaluating every one of those as something we can push further to the right and delay to hiring it, or look at different ways to restructure that position. We've also, looked at just overall contingency budgets and worked and, reduced those to we think the minimum level possible. And then just in terms of like budgeting for new initiatives and new programs and pieces, I would say those are going to be very, very minimal that gear towards overall specific retention initiatives of employees or other, priorities of the superintendent. But in terms of like new spending, when you look at these increases, what we're really trying to capture is really only the new costs that are coming because of these contractuals, service contracts and the increase in the wages. But we've had a pretty robust program of monitoring costs. That's something we're going to continue to manage and look at aggressively as we have, and look for more opportunities to do that. So we have managed it primarily that way. Some programs we've really like slowed them down as much as possible. So the discussions on reductions are integrated into this and are ongoing part of what we have in place. And it's a fair question to be asked. There's always more opportunities to look at more things we can continue to do. We've got a list that we're working off of and continue to evaluate, if we had to, or those some other things we could do. And we've talked about some of those in the past, and there's more opportunities to look at some of those, but we really start to like getting after some of the actual services and starting to chop some things down. And I think feel comfortable that really what we're asking for an increase is really just to capture just exclusively the cost increases. But fair question about cuts. We continue to monitor and look for opportunities to reduce expenses along the way.
Thank you very much, sir. That's great information to have in my hip pocket. Thank you.
Mr. Gottwald, see your hand up, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, for your info and for some of the others, the kind of along the line of what you were saying, the 3% state mandated salary increase is not mandated for everybody. It's only for a small portion of the employees, and it's only reimbursed at what, 40%, Dallas?
That's correct, sir. That's a helpful data point for everybody.
It's important just for the board to realize that when we say a mandated increase, it's really not for everyone. I know that y'all prefer to increase everyone at the same rate. I see your note here that you're not including the 3% across the board for the athletic payroll in this assumption. Shifting gears just a little bit, I support the tuition and fee increases that you're showing here. But I don't think y'all should be bringing a budget to us in April that has a $2 million deficit. I don't think we can afford that. I think we need to have tighter control over that and find savings or more revenue sources. But as Jeff said, the fund balance, the reserve is not healthy. It's not in a bad place now, but it's unsustainable to keep using that as a source of filling the gap. So I just would really hope that we don't see a budget in April to approve with that kind of deficit in it. I don't know where to find it. That's not my job, but I just think it's not, we can't keep cutting into it like we are. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other comments, dialogue, questions? And I want to acknowledge that, as some are looking at these numbers for the first time, when we have our meeting in April, we'll try and once again help break this out as we get to our committee and help understand these different funding sources and what's E&G and auxiliary and UMA and so forth. But if there are any questions that you had now or even following on afterward, the entire team here is certainly available to be responsive to those questions and help provide any clarifications that any have.
Yeah, Dallas, this is Kate. I think I had the same sort of reaction on the fund balance piece that I'm sure others did, and Teddy just articulated. I seem to recall seeing some more historical data about the fund balance that would just give us a better perspective about when and how long it's been dipped into this significantly. I just think that would be useful background to have an understanding of as we head into the April meeting.
We'll do that. We'll have that in the read ahead material so we can see the trends of how that's been looking back and projecting forward. We'll do that.
Thank you.
We will look forward to having you all here on post. Read ahead materials get assembled here, finalized with the superintendent right around the 10th of April. So they come out shortly that week thereafter. So there'll be plenty of time for everybody to chew on that. And between now and then, and by the time those come up leading to the board meeting, I'll do my best to reach out, make contact, answer questions, and facilitating a dialogues. I think under the best case scenario, we've all of a very, very similar mind as we head into the board meeting and have a general sense and comfort about where we're going, and appreciate the comments here and giving us some direction and some sense of feeling about the tuition and fees and a reaction to the deficits that are currently projected. Very, very helpful input for the team here.
Hey, everyone, I guess one of the final comments here is I'll sit down with Dallas. We will make 3 proposed, if you were budgets, A, B, C, with different cuts and revenue increases to try to get this to balance. And one variant may just be to lower the deficit, by 50% or so that we are addressing here, and we'll work hard to do that. Whether we have to cut, it's probably going to be a combination of cut and revenue increases, places where we can do so. So we'll have that information for you before as a read ahead to the next board meeting. Over.
Admiral Wright, that concludes our presentation. And once again, thanks for the committee for assembling here for this session.
Right, General Furness and General Clark and everybody, I appreciate the time that you spent today, and the committee members. I really appreciate you chiming in and comments. And I'll work with Dallas, and we'll get the material ready for the next board meeting. And I hope everybody has a good day. And again, a pitch for that the campaign. We talk about that athletic budget. If some people can write some checks, we can reduce that athletic budget down. So, and appreciate everybody's support for that. Okay. Thanks, Dallas and General. Appreciate your time.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Have a great, bye-bye.